Welcome to the start of unofficially phase number 2 of the MLS regular season. And the reason why I say unofficially is because technically when the league released the schedule, they basically just said this is just the remaining of the September schedule, and that I expect in these next week or so we are either going to once again hear the release of the next 2 weeks of the schedule in October, or we're going to have the remaining of the schedule for the regular season, which includes when are we going to find out that when decision day is going to happen and all the matches that is going to be happening on decision day. But there is actually one more matches that we have to preview, and one more match that is going to be taking place in phase 1, and that, of course, is the Seattle Sounders versus LAFC, which takes place on Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, and that this is going to be the only Friday game that is going to be taking place, and that this is also the makeup game for the one that happened a couple weeks ago where it was postponed because of the you-know-what boycott situation happened. And last that I checked, I think this one is going to be on local television and going to be on ESPN Plus, and it's not going to be on FS1 or ESPN, or even worse, on Twitter, that is national television. And that it's kind of strange because usually when you have this kind of matchup between the Sounders and LAFC, you would expect that this game is on national television, but it seemed like that is not going to be the case, and it's just going to be on local television. Now, Seattle is currently coming into this game second in the West, but if they do win this game against LAFC, they would move temporarily to the top of the Western Conference, and depending on if SKC is able to get a result against FC Dallas, they could basically stay at the top of the Western Conference because they have a game in hand over Sporting KC right now. Now, for LAFC, they're currently in 5th in the West, and remember a couple of days ago where LAFC actually found themselves as low as 10th place. There was a lot of people that was kind of panicking. The fact that, oh my goodness, I cannot believe LAFC is below the red line this deep into the season. Well, thankfully, their win against Portland not only snapped their miserable run that they have in this phase 1 of the schedule, but they also propelled themselves up into 5th in the Western Conference. And, you know, now that I kind of look at the standing a little bit, and I try my best to not look at the standings because of how crazy it can get, the Western Conference is actually pretty tight, too. I mean, I've seen the Eastern Conference table where it is also so very tight in terms of right in the middle of the pack and all those teams that is fighting for those last couple of spots of the playoffs. But the same can go about the Western Conference, and that if you can, of course, get a win or even just a mini winning streak, you can find yourself propelled from being at the bottom of the table to being on the top of the table, and vice versa. If you started to lose a ton of games and go on a cold streak, then you can find yourself very quickly near the basement of the Western Conference. Now, for the Seattle Sounders, they of course started phase 1 with a 3-0 win against the Portland Timbers. Then the last time both of these teams met, it was a 3-1 win between them and LAFC. Then it was a 2-2 draw between them and RSL, and then they lost 2-1 against the Timbers, as that was the only loss that they suffered in phase 1 of the schedule. And then they had that historic 7-1 beatdown over the San Jose Earthquakes at home. Now, for LAFC, they of course have a lot of red mark on their phase 1 resort because they did lose a lot of games doing it. First, they lost to their crosstown rival, the Galaxy, 2-0. Then they of course lost Seattle 3-1 in that resort. They did win 5-1 against the Quakes, and I actually forgot one more resort here for LAFC, and that of course is the 3-0 loss that they suffer against the Galaxy again in El Tráfico. Then it was another 3-0 loss that they suffer against RSL before they did win 4-2 against the Portland Timbers. And I also need to have a marker in terms of my prediction of this game, and I'm going to say the Sounders going to win this. The Seattle Sounders have a lot of confidence coming into this game, and while LAFC, you know, they did get a much-needed win against the Portland Timbers, you got to keep in mind that was a Timbers team that was very short-handed, and that the other thing that might give me a little bit of hope that maybe LAFC can get a result is that they are going to get Tuesta back, and I'm not quite sure whether or not if he's going to start or not, because he just came back with this team in the last game as a substitute. But again, the Sounders, they're just red hot right now, and they're definitely gunning to try to retake that first place spot in the Western Conference. So I'm going to give them the edge in this one. Plus, this is a home game for the Seattle Sounders, and unless they play against the Portland Timbers, they do not lose or drop points at home very often. So yeah, I'm going to give the Sounders an edge in this one over LAFC. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is Sporting KC versus FC Dallas, as this is going to be the first of what would be 11 games that's going to be taking place on Saturday. So because of the fact that we have some madness that's going to be happening on Saturday, and there's going to be a point of the Saturday action where there's going to be at least 6 games on at the same time, this means that most likely I'm going to have to once again split the review into 2 parts, and that I'll just look at the first 6 games in part number 1 and then look at the last 7 games in part number 2 once the last Sunday game, which there's only going to be 1 game that's going to be on Sunday, and right after that lone Sunday game is over, that's when I'm going to do the review for part number 2. Now, for this game between SKC versus FC Dallas, this is a 3:30 p.m. Eastern kickoff, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, 2:30 local time, which means that usually when you have this kind of kickoff time on Saturday, unfortunately, it's probably going to be on Twitter. SKC, of course, as I said, they're currently top in the West, but, you know, again, it depends on if Seattle was able to beat LAFC, and then if they can, of course, get a win in this, they could fall themselves into second place in the Western Conference. While FC Dallas, yeah, they have been on a bit of a hot streak lately, as they have now rose themselves all the way to 4th place in the Western Conference. Phase 1 resort for both of these teams. For SKC, they start out with a 2-1 win against Minnesota on the road, but this is when things kind of went sideways for SKC, because then they lost 5-2 on the road against Houston, drew 1-1 against Colorado, and I forgot there was also another loss that they suffer against the Houston Dynamo. This time it was a 2-1 loss on the road. Then it was a 1-1 draw between them and FC Dallas before winning 1-0 against Minnesota, and kind of did it unconvincingly with the way that they play against the Loons in the last game. But for Dallas, after they kind of got off to a slow start to their restart of the season and suffer their first loss of the season by losing 1-0 to FC Dallas, they have only lost once ever since then. They drew 0-0 against Nashville. After that, drew 0-0 again, this time against their hated Texas interstate rival Houston Dynamo. Then they won 3-1 at home against Minnesota, drew 1-1 against SKC, lost 3-2 against Minnesota, but keep in mind that was a game where they kind of rested a lot of guys in that game. Then they won 2-1 against the Houston Dynamo, and then they, of course, won 4-1 against Colorado in this game. Now, I would say that Dallas does have the advantage coming into this game, but I have a feeling this could potentially be a draw, and that maybe SKC can win this one, mainly because, you know, they don't usually lose a lot of games at home, but the big factor I think SKC could potentially get at least a point in this is that I think Dallas is going to have to go with a rotational squad in this game. Like Luchi Gonzalez in the last game against Colorado, he elected to not go with a rotational lineup and put the same strong 11 that he put against the Dynamo in that game against the Rapids. And judging by the fact of how congested this schedule is and how every team are kind of forced to play with a rotational squad at least once in every week of these games, I'm assuming Dallas is going to have to do that, and Luchi Gonzalez is going to have to force his hand to go with a rotational lineup, because I don't see how he's going to start the same starting 11 in this game. If that is the case, then that's definitely not a recipe in terms of trying to get a result against an SKC team that definitely have a lot of proof. You know, they might be at the top of the Western Conference, but there is definitely a lot of question to be asked about this team, and that the way that they have looked in phase 1 of the schedule, they don't look like a team that probably should belong in the top of the Western Conference, and they have shown signs during phase number 1 of the schedule where they have shown signs of last season, where they have been dropping being resort and giving up late goals like they have done many times last season. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be New England versus NYCFC. The Revs is 3-5-3, while NYCFC is 5-1-5. This game kicks off at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, so this is kind of an unusual kickoff time. Usually when you have all these games on Saturday, you have the early game, which is going to be on Twitter, and then the rest of them is going to be just prime time game. But this is technically still a matinee game between both of these teams. The Revs, of course, currently in 8th place in the Eastern Conference, while NYCFC currently 6th in the East. Phase 1 resort for the Revs. They drew 0-0 in their first game against the Union, then won 2-1 on the road against DC United, drew 1-1 against the Redbulls at home before losing 2-0 to NYCFC the last time both of these teams met. Then it was a 2-1 win on the road against Chicago before almost stealing a point against the Union, but unfortunately gave up a late goal to lose 2-1 against the Union on the road. For NYCFC, they of course lost 1-0 on the road, technically against the Redbulls in the Red Bull Arena Derby. Then it was a 1-0 win against Columbus, with a 3-1 win against FC Cincinnati followed by that. As I mentioned, they of course won 2-0 against New England on the road. They drew 0-0 to DC United in a game that they clearly should have won, and that they of course won 2-1 against FC Cincinnati. And you know, NYCFC have definitely been on a bit of a hot streak, but here's the thing. They don't have Maxi Morales potentially in this game because he of course suffered once again another injury in that game, and you can clearly see that, yeah, he's started to, if this is going to be a guy that's going to be injury prone, and especially how Maxi Morales is getting to that age, this is definitely not a good sign for NYCFC, and they might think about maybe getting a replacement for him. But either way, one thing that is kind of weird about New England this season is that they cannot get resort at home. In fact, they still have not won a game at home, even though they are now 11 game into the season. And because of that, I'm going to say this is going to be a win for NYCFC. And you know, the struggle that they have at home is kind of a little bit mysterious, but this is going to be an NYCFC team that, as I said, they have been a little bit red hot in these last couple of games. And although there's been a couple of times that they haven't even looked decent, I think they're going to have an advantage in terms of this New England team that's, you know, they have been a little bit inconsistent in these past couple of games, but they have also struggled in terms of finding their home form, and that I think they're one of the only team in MLS that is still searching for their first home victory. I know the San Jose Earthquakes is the other that still have not got a home win this season, but yeah, it's kind of odd seeing New England, even though they're in the playoffs spot right now. The only reason why they should be a little bit higher in the table, and what's kind of holding them back in terms of being a team in the top half of the table is that they just struggle this season when they're playing at home. But moving on, in terms of the next match, now one team that is not struggling this season at home is Inter Miami, as they of course got 2 of those win at home. Now, this is going to be a road game for them against Atlanta, and that, if you want to talk about struggle, yeah, that's what Miami is in terms of their road form, as they're still searching for their first win on the road. But last time when they faced against Atlanta, they were able to get a 0-0 draw in that game and able to get their first point on the road. And I have a feeling with the way how much Atlanta has struggled, especially how they just got absolutely blown out of the water against Nashville, this could be a good chance for Inter Miami to potentially get their first victory against Atlanta. But as I said, coming into this game, Atlanta has a 3-2-6 record, while Miami has a 2-2-7 record. 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific is the kickoff of this game. Atlanta, they're barely hanging on to that last spot in the Eastern Conference in 10th place, while Miami, even though they're last in the East, they're only 3 points behind Atlanta, and that if they can, of course, get a win in this game, and depending on what other team does around them, they could find themselves above the red line for the first time this season. Now, in terms of the Phase 1 schedule for Atlanta, this season they have really struggled from the MLS's back tournament, and also So from the Phase 1 resort, because besides the fact that they got that 2-0 win against Nashville, they have not got a win ever since and have went winless in 5 games. And during those 5-game stretch, they lost 3-1 on the road against Orlando City and they lost 3-1 at home against Orlando City and lose to them for the very first time. It was a 0-0 draw between both of them, as I mentioned before, the last time they met each other. Then it was a 1-1 draw that they had against Orlando City before they lost 2-1 on the road to Miami in the second meeting. And then they lost 4-2 against Nashville, and probably one of the more embarrassing loss that Atlanta has suffered in their franchise history. Now, for Miami, they of course won 3-2 at home against Orlando City, but then they lost 1-0 to Nashville on the road. It was a 0-0 draw between both of these teams, as I mentioned. Then it was another 0-0 draw, but this one probably is a frustrating 0-0 draw that Miami suffered in the hands of Nashville FC, consider they had bunch of chances to potentially score a goal. Then they of course won 2-1, as I mentioned, against Atlanta before losing 2-1 on the road against Orlando City. But either way, I think Inter Miami has a big chance to win this one, and this is why I'm not going to say this is a bold prediction, because I think it's going to come in terms of them potentially getting their first road win, and especially knowing the fact that it's going to be a matter of time before they are going to confirm the signing of Gonzalo Higuain and how he could potentially bring in some goal for this team. This team might be dead last in the Eastern Conference, but if they can get their big signing going, watch out. This team could really start to rise themselves up in the Eastern Conference, and that I just have a feeling against a struggling Atlanta team, this is a big opportunity for them to finally get their first ever road win in their franchise history. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is the Redbulls versus FC Cincinnati. So these two teams are kind of struggling coming into this game, but the Redbulls did get a crucial win in the last one on the road against DC United, and hence a lot of people would think that they're going to be the favorites coming into this game against FC Cincinnati. The Redbulls currently with a 4-2-5 record, while FC Cincinnati has a 2-3-6 record. This game also kicks off at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Redbulls currently 7 in the East, while FC Cincinnati is second to dead last in the Eastern Conference. For the Redbulls, besides that 1-0 win that they got at home technically against NYCFC in the Red Bull Arena Derby, they lost 1-0 against the Union on the road. Then it was a 1-1 draw between them against New England before losing 1-0 against DC United, and this was the game that got Chris Armas pretty much ousted in terms of the head coach position for the Red Bulls. Then they followed that with a 3-0 loss at home against the Union, and in a game that they have really kind of hit rock bottom. But they were able to bounce themselves back and won 2-1 against DC United on the road. Now for FC Cincinnati, they have not got a win in phase number 1 of the schedule and become one of the few teams that have yet to register a win during phase 1 of the schedule. They started with a 0-0 draw against DC United at home. Then it was a 3-0 loss that they suffered against Chicago. It was a 0-0 draw between them and Columbus in the Hell is Rio Derby. Another 0-0 draw, this time against Chicago. Then it was a 3-0 loss against, once again, their interstate rival Columbus before losing 2-1 against FC Cincinnati. Although the good news about that game is that at least they finally score a goal after they went almost 500 minutes without actually scoring a goal, and that it's pretty clear goal scoring is a huge issue for this FC Cincinnati team. Now, for the Red Bulls, once again, they're facing another team that struggle in terms to score goals. And actually, by the way, this DC United game, it was actually a 2-0 win that they got, not a 2-1 result that they got over DC United. But since they were able to dispatch against a team that struggled in terms of scoring goals on the road last time, I think something tells me that they're going to able to dispatch FC Cincinnati. And I can see this to be a back-to-back win for the Red Bulls against a Cincinnati team that, like I said, they just don't have any goal-scoring threat whatsoever. And it's kind of sad to see this happen again for this team because, this season they bought a lot of key pieces, and they finally thought that they got their true goal scorer in Jurgen Locadia and Yaya Kubo, and both of them have not done well at all with this team whatsoever. So yeah, this is a game that I think the Red Bulls got to win if they want to continue to have that momentum coming in before they get their permanent head coach and stay themselves above the red line in the Eastern Conference. But moving on, in terms of the next match, or the next match, I'm not sure why I said the next match that is, but the next match is the Columbus Crew versus Nashville SC. Now, one team that doesn't have to worry about them being danger falling above the red line or below the red line is the Columbus Crew, because they currently have the best record in MLS with a 7-3-1 record, while Nashville, yeah, they have definitely rise themselves up in the East for the past couple of games with a 3-3-4 record, and that they have now gone unbeaten in 4 games after they suffered that 3-1 loss against Orlando a couple of weeks ago. This game kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Columbus, as I said, they have the best record in MLS, while Nashville is currently 9th in the Eastern Conference. And hey, Nashville SC above the red line, and this is what I'm telling you, how not only the fact that I see with some of the resort that Nashville has putting in has been good, but if they can continue this kind of good run, which it seemed like that is the case, they can definitely find themselves above the red line, and they did exactly that, now finding themselves in 9th place in the Eastern Conference. Now, for the Columbus Crew, they won 3-0 against Chicago to start off Phase 1. Then they suffered the only loss of this season by losing 1-0 on the road against NYCFC. Then it was a 0-0 draw between them and FC Cincinnati before it was a 1-0 win against the Union at home. Then it was a 3-0 win that they had against FC Cincinnati before they were able to come from behind to draw 2-2 against the Chicago Fire in the last game. For Nashville, they won 1-0 against FC Dallas in a historic first ever win in their franchise history in MLS. Then it was a 0-0 draw between them and FC Dallas. They did lose 2-0 to Atlanta on the road, and then lose 3-1 against Orlando City on the road. But that was the last time they actually suffer a loss, as they would then go on and win their first ever home game by beating Inter Miami 1-0. They drew 1-1 against Orlando City. I'm not quite sure why I wrote Miami there. Before, it was a 0-0 draw against Inter Miami, and themselves also feel like they could have got a win in that game because they had some glorious opportunity to get all 3 points on the road in that one. But they were able to put away most of their chances against Atlanta and able to put a 4-2 beatdown against Atlanta United in this game. And despite the fact that I know Columbus is going to be heavy favorites and that they have been very good this season at home, I'm going to say this is going to be a draw, and I feel like, with how Nashville has been playing in these last couple of games, not only the fact that they have now been able to look like a team that looks like an above average team in terms of defending, but they have all of a sudden find a way to score goals. And this is the thing that I said about Nashville, where it's pretty clear that this team have an above average midfield and a team that is very, very good in the defensive end, but all they need is that goal score threat that they are looking for, and that if they can bang in some of the goals, they can really look like a very decent team. Well, if they can, of course, do exactly what they did to Atlanta in the last game, and knowing the fact that they are also going to eventually get that DP striker that they just recently signed in Honda Cadets, eventually get going for this team. This could be a team that not only the fact that they could make the playoffs, but they could really make noise in the Eastern Conference. I mean, the Eastern Conference is a very weak conference, and that if you can, of course, get some winning streak going against a lot of mediocre team that is right now in the Eastern Conference, you can really find yourself near the top half of the Eastern Conference. And it's kind of crazy to say that, consider how bad Nashville has started their season, but it's great to see that they're kind of started to figure it out, and that they're kind of having that moment as an expansion team where, usually in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit rough, but once you start to figure out, then the success is going to happen, and it seemed like Nashville looked like they're making that stride of finding that next step and started to be an expansion team that has kind of found that good rhythm for them to go on a bit of an unbeaten streak. But that being said, I am now going to switch boards and look at the next 6 games that is going to be taking place during this crazy 13 games weekend action around phase number 2 of MLS. But yeah, moving on is DC versus Toronto FC. Now, for those of you wondering where exactly the Canadian team is going to be playing their home games now, the fact that they announced that Canadian team are no longer going to be playing in their home market for these games when they play against American MLS team. Well, for TFC, they are going to play in Hartford, and they actually changed their location, as it was long reported that they were going to be playing in Red Bull Arena alongside with the Redbulls, NYCFC, and also the Montreal Impact, but it have just recently announced that they're going to be playing in Hartford instead of Red Bull Arena. And speaking of the Impact, they of course will be playing in Red Bull Arena, while for the Vancouver Whitecaps, they're going to be playing at Providence Park for their home game, and there is going to be, I think, one of these games from phase number 2 where there's this very strange kind of circumstances where the Vancouver Whitecaps are going to be designated as the home team, but they are going to be playing against the Portland Timbers, and that's going to be very odd seeing the Whitecaps designated as the home team, even though the away team, the Portland Timbers, are literally playing in their home stadium. But for this match between DC versus Toronto, this game is going to be kicking off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Again, a lot of games kicking off around similar time, which hence that's why I said there's going to be times where there's going to at least be 6 or even 8 games that's going to be on at the same time. DC currently with a 2-5-4 record, while Toronto currently had a 6-3-2 record. By the way, it's been a while since TFC have played a game. It's been 10 days ever since they, of course, won 2-1 against Montreal. And, of course, Montreal are able to do them even a bigger favor by decided to lose the Vancouver Whitecaps, and therefore they're going to be representing the MLS team in the Canadian Championship. While for DC United, they're currently 11th in the East and are really struggling right now heading into phase number 1, while Toronto is currently 3rd in the East. For DC United, they of course drew 0-0 against FC Cincinnati to start the season, but then they lost 2-1 against New England at home. Then it was a 4-1 drumming that they took against the Union on the road. They got a very lucky 1-0 win against the Redbulls away, but then it was a 0-0 draw between NYCFC, and in a game that it's even more luckier the fact that they got a point in this game, consider they only become the second ever MLS team to register 0 shots in the entire game, and then they got a reality check in the next one as they lost 2-0 against their Atlantic Cup rival, the Redbulls. Now for Toronto, they start off phase 1 strong with a 3-0 victory against Vancouver, then it was a 1-0 victory against the Whitecaps. Then it was a 1-0 win against Montreal, and they were definitely on the doorstep of breaking the record for the longest unbeaten run in MLS regular season history until they lost 1-0 against Montreal, and that was the game where they had that really stupid penalty kick where Pozuelo decided to pass it to Piatti from the 12-yard box, and that goal, of course, did not count because Piatti encroached in that play. Followed by that embarrassing penalty kick and their first loss in 18 games. They follow up with another embarrassing loss against the Vancouver Whitecaps and got outlasted by the Whitecaps by losing 3-2 in that game, before they did win 2-1 against Montreal in this game, and that they, of course, would also want to thank the Impact, as I said, about the fact that they themselves also lose to Vancouver in one of their 2 matches to send them to the Canadian Championship. By the way, this is an easy one. Toronto is going to be the favorites in this. I mean, any times when any team face DC United, and I know I said this with the Whitecaps before, but this is pretty much free points that DC United is giving. Like, knowing how bad things have gone for this team, you would have to be at your very worst if you cannot able to get at least a point or all 3 points against that team. And knowing the fact that Toronto has been playing a lot of kind of garbage team, and for the most part they've been pretty successful against them, I think this should be an easy win for Toronto. And unless we see a very surprising result like that Colorado versus RSL game from last week, I expect TFC to be able to win this one. Now, moving on, in terms of the next match, is Orlando versus the Chicago Fire. Now, on paper, Orlando City is going to be the favorites in this game, but you got to remember, this is the Chicago Fire, and knowing the fact that they have gone through this pattern where they lose, and draw a game, they're due to potentially get a win if they're going to continue to follow this inconsistent pattern. But Orlando City currently coming into this game with a 5-4-2 record, while Chicago currently have a 2-3-6 record. This game kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Orlando currently is in 4th place in the East, while Chicago is currently 12th place in the East, but I think they're only 2 points behind Atlanta for that last spot in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. For Orlando, their phase 1 result has been kind of good for the most part, although they did suffer the only loss in their first game in phase 1 by losing 3-2 to Inter Miami. Then it was a 3-1 win against Nashville, followed by another 3-1 win, this time by finally beating their hated rival Atlanta United on the road. Then it was a 1-1 draw between them and Nashville, followed by another 1-1 draw in a game that they clearly should have won against Atlanta, but they were only able to get a point in that game before able to redeem themselves and able to win 2-1 against Inter Miami in that game. Now for the Chicago Fire, they lost 3-0 against Columbus in the first game, but they did win 3-0 against FC Cincinnati in the next one before losing 3-1 to NYCFC. Then it was a 0-0 draw between them and FC Cincinnati again, followed by Chicago losing 2-1 to New England on the road. Then it was a 2-2 draw against Columbus in a game that they clearly should have won. I mean, they were up 2-0 in that game, especially when you're at home and have that 2-0 advantage. You should not be able to blow that result, even if you're playing against the best team in the league, who wasn't even starting a very good team heading into that one. By the way, I'm going to say Orlando is going to win this, but don't be surprised if Chicago can pull off a bit of a surprise, because as I said, they're due to get a victory with the inconsistent form that they've been in throughout this season and also for the past couple of years. And I really hope for Orlando City. These last couple of games, I have seen how Orlando City seems to kind of take their foot off the gas whenever they get to the second half, and kind of being a little bit conservative whenever they go up 1-0. That's got to change in terms of this team, and I hope Oscar Pereira will drill into that mindset of this team, because you cannot be conservative when you're up 1-0, and that we've seen in the last 3 games where whenever they go up 1-0, they become conservative. The other team immediately punish them, and that they kind of got lucky in the last game, the fact that they were able to respond, and they kind of got a little bit help of the VAR in terms of just that crazy sequence that I'm not really going to mention just for the time's sake of it. But yeah, this team, it's a decent team in the Eastern Conference, but in the last couple of games, they have fell into this habit of not being able to close out the game and being just way too conservative when they get the opening goal of their games. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be Houston versus Minnesota. Now, the good news for the Loons is that they finally got a week worth of break, which I think the Loons desperately needed this week-long of break to recover, because you can definitely see in that Sporting KC game that there was a lot of tired legs in this team, and that we definitely need a week-long break to try to get those guys that's been out of our team for 2 weeks because of injury to kind of recover, to come back to this team. And although guys like Ethan Finley, Ozzy Alonso, and Amaria most likely is not going to be recovered enough to be able to play in this game, at least we're going to get Roman Metanier back, which you can clearly see he was one of the pieces that we definitely miss in terms of the full back position. Now, the bad news for Minnesota is that they're playing against the Dynamo on the road, and besides Children's Mercy Park, BBVA Compass Stadium is a house of horror for Minnesota. They have rarely got a victory in that. They only have one win in all competition, and that was back in the U.S. Open Cup, but they have got 0 win at BBVA Compass Stadium. And it's not surprised why Houston has been dominant in this series, because, you know, the Dynamo, they're always a team that tends to be very, very well when they're playing at home, and this is a Minnesota team that tends to struggle whenever they have to play in an environment that is very hot and just very humid. Although you can ignore the MLS's back tournament, that was just kind of an outlier, but historically they have really struggled in terms of that. Now, the Dynamo, they're currently coming into this game 8th in the Western Conference after in the last game they suffered their first loss of phase number 1. While Minnesota is currently 3rd in the Western Conference, but again, this is a very tight Western Conference right now, where if they slip up in these next couple of games, they could really find themselves tumbling down the Western Conference. For Houston, they drew 0-0 in their first game of phase 1. Then they went on this hot streak where they won 5-2 on the road against SKC. 3-0 win against Minnesota between both of these teams the last time they faced each other. Then it was a 2-1 win against not Minnesota, but actually Sporting KC, that they, of course, make it free in a road in terms of their last free resort, before drawing 1-1 against the Colorado Rapids and losing 2-1 to the Houston Dynamo in the Texas Derby last week. Now, for Minnesota, they started phase 1 with an ugly kind of stretch where they lost 2-1 to SKC, then lose 3-1 against Dallas, and then lose 3-0 against Houston. But they got a much-needed win at home against RSL 4-0. Then they got a very tense, but still 3 points win against FC Dallas by winning 3-2 at home, before losing 1-0 against or 1-0 against Sporting KC in a game that it looked like we were always going to lose with the lineup that Adrian Heath was starting in this game. Now, I'm going to say it's going to be a draw between both of these teams, and I'm really hoping it's going to be a draw because, again, coming into this game, even with Metanir back in this game, it is still going to be a team that is still depleted with injury, and knowing the fact that the Dynamo want to bounce back after that tough loss in the Texas Derby, it is going to be very tough for the Loons to get a result. However, you know, if you look at these next couple of games, it's not going to get any easier for Minnesota, and that I really think, you know, if we're going to continue to maintain our spot in the top half of the Western Conference, we got to get resort on the road. I mean, it's good that we're getting resort at home like we always been, but the road is where we need to start to pick up points, because if we don't pick up points on the road, and especially how I hope when we get the remaining of the schedule for the regular season that we're going to have tons of home games, because for whatever reason, when you look at this season, we only had 4 home games this season compared to what 7 road games if you're going to count for the rest of the schedule for September. So yeah, we need to get some resort on the road, even though we're going to be facing a lot of tough teams on the road coming forward. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be RSL versus Vancouver, as this pen actually just decided to quit on me. Oh no, this pen just decided to quit on me. Let me see if I have a pen here. Yep. I think this one works. Is it? Nope. Let's take a look. Actually, I'm just gonna use a marker to put the timestamp, which probably is not a good idea to put timestamp on, but whatever. I can't really find myself a pen right now. But either way, in this match between RSL and Vancouver, RSL is coming into this game with a 3-5-3 record, while Vancouver coming into this game with a 4-0-7 record, and have at least looked decent in the last couple of games after how they started in phase 1 of the schedule. Now, RSL is currently 9th in the Western Conference, while Vancouver is currently 11th in the West, so both of these teams are just on the outside looking in terms of trying to get into that last spot of the Western Conference. For RSL, they got off to a great start by winning 4-1 against Colorado in the Rocky Mountain Cup. Then they were involved with that crazy 4-4 draw between them and the Portland Timbers before drawing 2-2 at home against the Seattle Sounders. They did lose 4-0 on the road against Minnesota, but that was a rotational team that play against the Loons on the road. Before they got a big victory against LAFC at home by winning 3-0. Then they suffered the most surprising result of the season by losing 5-0 to Colorado and losing to the Rapids for the first time since 2007 at home in the Rocky Mountain Cup. So it's safe to say that this RSL team has kind of gone from a team that is a very committed and resilient team to being one that is a little bit inconsistent. Now, for Vancouver, as I said, they got off to a horrible start to this phase 1 of the schedule by losing 3-0 to Toronto, then losing 1-0 against Toronto. Both of those games, they didn't even look like a team that was going to get their first win anytime soon. Then they lose, of course, to Montreal 2-0 before winning 3-2 against TFC, and certainly one of the more impressive results for Vancouver in this one. Then they, of course, lost 4-2 against Montreal, but at least I thought that loss that they suffered was probably the best out of all the losses that they have suffered in phase number 1. Before they did win 3-1 against Montreal and kind of got a little help from the fact that they were up a man for remaining of the game, and that Rudy Camacho decided to become an idiot and decided to just punch the leg of Freddie Montero and got himself sent off in the process. Now, as I said before, Vancouver has definitely looked much better in these last couple of games, but I really think RSL should be able to win this one, and it's not very often you see RSL drop back resort at home, and that last game against Colorado is a reminder that this is still a team as resilient as this team can be. This team sometimes, if they have a bad run like they did in the last game, it could just really capitulate. But I see RSL able to bounce back in this game against a Whitecaps team that they're going to have confidence in terms of how they've been playing in the last couple of games. But keep in mind, this is a road game for them, and that road games tends to not be a friend for the Vancouver Whitecaps, even though they actually already got a road win this season against the Galaxy on the road. But I just don't see it happening in this one against an RSL team that is going to be very fuming after what happened last week and looking to try to rebound in this game. But moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be the Galaxy against the Rapids. So from one Rocky Mountain team to talk about the other Rocky Mountain team, that is the Colorado Rapids, and they are a team that after they of course got that surprising 5-0 result against RSL on the road, they kind of had a reality check against FC Dallas. And now things are even going to get tougher for them on the road because they're going to face a Galaxy team that currently is in 6th place in the West and are one of the few team, if not, I think the only team in the league to have yet to lose a game during phase 1 of the regular season. Colorado, of course, is currently 11 in the West, and for the Galaxy, they started off phase 1 with a 2-0 win against LAFC in El Tráfico. Then they followed that with a 3-2 win against the Quakes in the Cali Clasico. Then it was a 3-2 win on the road against the Portland Timbers before another 3-0 result and another win in El Tráfico. Then they, of course, drew 0-0 against the Quakes in the game. That was probably the one they looked the least impressive in terms of all these games that they have played in phase 1. But otherwise, they have looked very, very dangerous heading into these, or they have looked very dangerous in these last couple of games. Now, for the Rapids, they of course lost 4-1 against RSL to start their phase 1 schedule. Then they had 3 straight 1-1 draw, starting with a 1-1 draw against SKC at home. Then it was a 1-1 draw for them against the Quakes on the road. Then it was a 1-1 draw at home against Houston. As I mentioned, they had that surprising 5-0 result against RSL, and I was thinking maybe that's kind of a turning point for Robin Fraser's team and they can maybe get something going. No, they lost 4-1 to FC Dallas in the very next game. And although I don't think the Rapids played badly in that game, and the scoreline definitely didn't reflect in terms of the fact that they actually had chances to score goals in that game, it's the defense that is a bit of an issue. And when you have defensive issue and you're facing a team that is just red hot right now in terms of goal scoring, that can only means a disaster for you. And that I think the Galaxy should be able to win this game, and they should bounce back after kind of that frustrating draw that they had against the Quakes in the Cali Clasico, and that they're going to continue this hot streak that they are on ever since Phase 1 of the schedule was released. But now moving on into the next game and the last game of the Saturday action. And speaking of the Quakes, that's the team that I'm going to be talking about next. And this is part 2 of the San Jose Earthquakes versus the Portland Timbers. As back in part number 1, it was a 1-1 draw between the Quakes and the Timbers. But in many ways, it was a very frustrating 1-1 draw that the Quakes had. And I just don't get when I have reads a lot of these experts saying that, well, you know, it's a 1-1 draw that the Quakes had, but at least they're showing some signs that they can eventually turn it on, and that they kind of recover after that poor start that they had in Phase 1 of the resort. Yeah, but we still have not got a win. And just because the fact that, you know, the last game, yes, we definitely look much better going forward on the attack, and we look shut down in terms of the defensive end, and that the only goal we conceded was just a defensive mistake that fortunately was punished by the Portland Timbers. But other than that, it was a pretty decent game for us. But what's so frustrating about that one is that we didn't get the 3 points, and we didn't get a win in this one. And at the end of the day, you know, the Quakes, they can continue to play like what they did in the last game against the Portland Timbers. But as long as if they don't get resort, I just don't see where the improvement is going to be. I mean, it's one thing to have that improvement in terms of playing in these games, but it's another where the resort need to show. Because if you're playing well and the resort are not showing, it really doesn't matter. I mean, nobody's going to remember down the line that, well, you know, they play well in some of these games, but unfortunately they weren't able to pick up the resort, and hence that's why they, of course, missed the playoffs. So, yeah, I just feel like in some way, some of these people and some of these experts are saying the Quakes are improving, or just taking the sentiment kind of moment. And I don't know about you, but I'm just not one of those person that like to hear about these sentiment kind of stuff, and that I just feel like if the Quakes are going to improve and look like a team that is going to challenge for those playoff spots, they need to finally start getting some resort and not dropping points at home because they cannot put the ball in the back of the net. But anyhow, after my little mini rant in terms of how I just feel frustrated about that resort back on Wednesday, they get to play again in this game again Saturday, and no doubt I think the Timbers are going to start a stronger lineup in this game. I mean, that Wednesday game, see, that's the other frustrating thing about that Wednesday game, is that the Timbers didn't really start a very strong lineup in that game. And yes, we also didn't start a strong lineup ourselves too, but it was a great opportunity to face against a Timbers team with a weak lineup and a struggling team to get all 3 points, and we couldn't, of course, take advantage of it. Because of that, we're currently last in the Western Conference right now, while Portland is currently 7 in the West. Phase 1 resort, we got a 3-2 loss to start our misery in terms of Phase 1. Then it was a 5-1 loss that we suffered against LAFC. It was a 1-1 draw between us and the Rapids before it was a historically bad franchise loss against the Sounders, where we lost 7-1. Don't really need to mention anything more about that resort other than it was straight out embarrassing. Then it was a 0-0 draw between us and the Galaxy before it was a 1-1 draw against the Portland Timbers. For the Timbers, they lost 3-0 to Seattle for their first game in Phase 1 and in the Cascadia Derby. Then they, of course, drew 4-4 against RSL in a game that they clearly should have won if they didn't blow those 2 goals in stoppage time. Then they, of course, won 3-2 lost 3-2 at home against the Galaxy before winning 2-1 against the away, but that was also a game where they had to pay a hefty price of losing Sebastian Blanco for the rest of the season. They then lose 4-2 against LAFC on the road before drawing 1-1 against the Quakes in the Wednesday matchup. And I'm just going to say this is going to be a draw between both of these teams. And as much as I really want the Quakes to win this game, again, I expect Portland's going to start a stronger lineup in this one, and that a stronger their lineup for the Timbers, this is going to really test the defense. And I know people have said that the defense have definitely improved in the last two games, and in some way it kind of has, but now we're going to face, this could be a true test against a Timbers attack that, so far in phase one, the attack is not the reason why they've been dropping resort. The reason why the Timbers have been dropping resort is because of the same reason that Sporting KC dropped a lot of resort last season, which is they gave up goals late in the game, and it seemed like whenever they gave up goals, they literally just kind of capitulate, and in some way you can also say that's kind of similar to what the Quakes did back in the latter part of the 2017 season, where once they concede a goal, they basically just capitulate. But either way, I'm going to say it's a draw in this game, but I'm really hoping we can win this game because, again, this is a team that I still feel like they're low in confidence, and that this team is going to have their confidence back and get rid of this mindset of just being too complacent in terms of getting draws. We need to start winning again in this one. But yeah, I am going to now switch the board one more time as I'm going to be looking at the last game of this week action, which is going to be taking place on Sunday. Anyway, it's time to talk about the last game of this preview and the last game of this weekend action, which is going to be the Sunday game between the Montreal Impact versus the Philadelphia Union. And as I said earlier before, the Impact is going to play their home game for the rest of the season at Redbull Arena. So this game is going to be played at Redbull Arena, and it's going to be kicking off at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time. Now, Montreal is currently 5th in the Eastern Conference, while Philly is currently 2nd in the East. Montreal currently, in terms of their record, is 5-1-5, while the Union currently have a record of 5-3-2. And if you look at the phase one result for the Impact, they started off great with a 2-0 win against the Vancouver Whitecaps, but then they lost 1-0 on the road against TFC. But they did win 1-0, and this is actually the wrong score here. But they did win 1-0 on the road against TFC to snap their 18-game unbeaten run in the regular season. Then it was a 2-1 loss that they suffered in the hands of Toronto before winning 4-2 against Vancouver on the road, and on a chance that they had to potentially go into the Canadian Championship with a win against the Vancouver Whitecaps. Yeah, we all know what happened in terms of that one, and therefore they of course lost 3-1 in that game, and that they will not be making into the Canadian Championship this year, and that I think unless if they can of course win the CONCACAF Champions League, they are not going to be back to CCL heading into next season. Now for the Union, they start off with a 0-0 draw between them and New England on the road, but other than that, they've been pretty solid so far in phase one, as they were able to win 1-0 at home against the Redbulls. Then it was a 4-1 thrashing that they gave to DC United before losing a hard-fought 1-0 game against Columbus in the battle of the top two team in the Eastern Conference. Then it was a 3-0 win that they of course got against the Redbulls before winning 2-1 against New England with a last-minute winner that they got thanks to Anthony Fontana. Now, in terms of the prediction of this game, and I didn't do a prediction box in this because if I were to do a prediction box, I don't want to put it like right here in the corner where it's kind of hard to see, but I'm just going to say the Union's going to win this game because their form definitely is much better where the Impact is right now. And although the Impact, they have been kind of inconsistent in their phase one resort, you got to remember this is probably the toughest team that they're going to face so far, and that the wins that they have got are against teams that are relatively easy to beat. I mean, they got 2 wins against Vancouver and probably should have got 3 wins against them and sweep the series, and that they of course got kind of fortunate in that Canadian Classic game and able to snap TFC unbeaten run. But they're about to face a Union team that is not going to be probably not going to do what Toronto did in that game, and that this is a team that I think is by far much better than the two other Canadian teams that they've been facing in phase 1 of the schedule. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for the preview of these weekend action. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of all these games, and as always, let me know in the comments below also of your prediction of all 13 of these games. And as I said near the beginning of the video, I will once again split the review into 2 parts, and that on Saturday night, after all the games are done, I'm going to look at the first 6 games of the weekend's action. After this one is over on Sunday, I'll look at the last 7 games that is going to be happening this weekend. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I, of course, will see you guys next time.